If you were to look at Britain on a map today, you'd be forgiven for thinking that its borders only encompass those of the British Isles.
But if you look at the world as a whole, you will find that there are actually 14 overseas territories where the British government still holds power.
From Gibraltar at the entrance of the Mediterranean to the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, these are the last remaining possessions.
At the height of its territorial control, a little over 100 years ago, the British Empire covered 1/4 of the globe's landmass. It ruled almost a third of the world's population. It was the empire on which the sun never set. But how did such a small island nation become the largest and most powerful empire the world has ever seen? The foundations of the British Empire were laid long before the state of Britain even formally existed. The dominant power in the British Isles throughout much of its history has been the Kingdom of England, with a well-developed economy and military.
England, during the medieval and early modern periods, came to rule over the smaller independent kingdoms in Wales and parts of Ireland.
To the north, the Kingdom of Scotland remained a fiercely proud and independent nation who had bit
from its powerful southern neighbor.
By the early 17th century, Elizabeth I of England had issued several trading and exploration commissions to English adventurers.
The intention was exploring and colonizing new territories yet to be claimed by other European powers. The likes of Sir Francis Drake and Sir Martin Frobisher claimed many lands in the name of England.
But these were not followed up with settlements. The first English colony at Roanoke Island in 1585 failed dramatically.
The colonists mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again.
Elizabeth also granted several royal charters to joint stock companies for the purpose of developing overseas trade.
Companies such as the Levant Company and the East India Company were granted monopolies on all English trade.
When Elizabeth died in 1603, the throne passed to James VI of Scotland. Upon ascension, James became king of both.
However, the two kingdoms remained distinct and were ruled separately as King James looked to build overseas colonies.
Colonies were to be ruled under one of three structures: crown, charter, or proprietary colonies. A crown colony was directly ruled by the monarch, but administered by a royally appointed governor and local council. A charter colony was similar, but ruled under a corporate charter, often granting colonists more political liberty. A proprietary colony was governed by an individual, typically a company head, as a commercial enterprise for shareholders.
Over time, these proprietary colonies became difficult to manage and transitioned to crown colonies instead. An important yet often overlooked development is the plantation of Ulster under King James.
It saw Protestant settlers from Scotland and England transported to parts of the north of Ireland. This model of organized colonization would form the blueprint for future English colonial expansion in the New World. Throughout the 1600s, the Kingdom of England expanded its overseas colonies in North America and the Caribbean.
Some were new ventures, whereas others were annexed from rivals, like New York, seized from the Dutch in 1665. England also developed trading networks in Africa and the East Indies, with factories and fortified trading posts.
A critical component was the Royal African Company, the leading participant in the brutal, lucrative.
During this period, Scotland also began to establish overseas colonies, looking enviously at English success.
Unfortunately, almost all these attempts ended in failure, with colonies barely lasting a few years.
The most abject failure came in 1698 with the Darien Scheme. It aimed to control the trade route across the Panama Isthmus. To finance it, capital equal to a fifth of Scotland's total wealth was raised from the public.
They named the colony Caledonia and built New Edinburgh. But the settlement quickly succumbed to hardships.
Food shortages, tropical disease, and Spanish attacks proved futile. A 1699 resupply failed. The settlement was abandoned.
200 survivors of the original 2,500 returned to Scotland in disgrace. The disaster plunged Scotland into financial crisis.
Many then saw their only chance to be part of a major power was to share in England's colonial enterprise.
By 1700, England and Scotland were independent, but the Glorious Revolution of 1680 legislation ensured only Protestants could inherit the English throne, but this law did not apply in Scotland, creating uncertainty.
Under Queen Anne, efforts were made to unite the parliaments and secure a Protestant line of succession.
When the Acts of Union were passed in 1707, England and Scotland united into one kingdom, Great Britain.
Over the following decades, Britain became involved in several wars with other European powers over colonial interests.
After victory in the War of Spanish Succession trade, Britain gained Newfoundland, Acadia, Gibraltar, and Minorca.
Meanwhile, the British East India Company fought its French rival across the Indian subcontinent for dominance.
The Battle of Plassey in 1757 wrestled control of Bengal from the local Nawab and his French allies.
This made Britain the leading power in India, a springboard for further expansion by force or threat.
Other wars, like the 7 Years' War, gifted Britain more territory at the expense of France and Spain.
The British captured Quebec in 1759, ending French power in North America. Florida was taken from Spain.
The 1763 Treaty of Paris gave Britain Caribbean islands, making it
The empire was powered by naval supremacy and indomitable mercantile trade, gaining immense wealth through taxation.
However, the issue of taxation would soon lead to revolution and the first major colonial loss for the empire. Britain taxed its 13 American colonies without consent or representation, straining relations in the 1760s-70s. Colonists renounced Parliament's authority in 1775. Britain sent troops, leading to the outbreak of revolution. In 1776, colonial leaders formed the Second Continental Congress and declared independence from Britain.
After 8 years of war, Britain's forces were defeated. The United States of America was recognized as independent.
The loss of America marked a sea change. Colonial efforts shifted towards Asia, the Pacific, and Africa.
Explorer Captain James Cook mapped and claimed much of the Pacific, including New Zealand and Australia, for Britain.
Cook was killed in Hawaii in 1779, but his 1770s discoveries were instrumental for further expansion.
Australia served as a new penal settlement. The first shipment of convicts arrived at New South Wales in 1788.
And this practice of sentencing criminals to transportation continued into the middle of the 19th century.
Britain also expanded its colonial interests into the North Pacific in the 1790s.
Explorers like George Vancouver and Alexander Mackenzie surveyed the coast, fueling the lucrative fur trade.
Inroads into the vast Rocky Mountains expanded British North America westwards.
War with France in 1803 challenged Britain again with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte after the French Revolution.
To protect itself, Britain invested heavily. The Royal Navy blockaded French ports and attacked overseas possessions.
A crucial victory was won at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 against the combined Franco-Spanish Navy.
Admiral Lord Nelson was killed, but victory eliminated invasion threat and secured Royal Navy supremacy for 140 years.
By 1815, Britain and its allies secured more territory from defeated France, Spain, and the Dutch.
Many new Caribbean colonies were sugar plantations, exclusively reliant on brutal slave labor for centuries.
The Industrial Revolution shifted focus to goods made at home. Abolitionist pressure forced an end to the slave trade in 1807.
Slavery itself was formally abolished in the empire in 1834, 27 years after the trade ended.
The period 1815 to 1914 was Britain's imperial century.
Singapore was founded as a trading post in 1819, a strategic hub later incorporated as a colony in 1824. In China, after the First Opium War in 1842, Britain seized control of Hong Kong and Shanghai.
In India, the East India Company's control was challenged in 1857 by the Sepoy rebellion of local troops.
After crushing the rebellion, Britain dissolved the East India Company in 1858 and brought India under direct rule. India became the empire's most valuable possession, colloquially named the jewel in the crown.
A new threat emerged from the Russian Empire, seeking to expand into Central Asia and the Mediterranean.
When Russia invaded the Ottoman Balkans in 1853, Britain and France entered the Crimean War to stop them.
Russia was defeated. A partial settlement in 1878 established spheres of influence in Central Asia.
Britain gained control of Cyprus from the Ottomans as a surety to defend against further Russian expansion.
The continent of Africa also witnessed a consolidation of British colonial power during the 19th century. British immigration to the Cape Colony increased in the 1820s, pushing Dutch-descended Boers into the northern hinterland.
Resentful Boers established independent republics, the Transvaal and Orange Free State.
These republics eventually succumbed to British occupation after the Second Anglo-Boer War ended in 1902.
Meanwhile, the 1869 opening of the Suez Canal proved vital for British trade routes to India and Asia.
Britain militarily occupied Egypt in 1882 to protect the canal, but did not formally annex it.
The scramble for Africa saw Britain gain much of the east and south. A Cape to Cairo railway was dreamed of.
As the 20th century dawned, Britain was world trade leader and global policeman, controlling even non-empire economies.
The All-Red Line telegraph network, completed in 1902, connected Britain directly to all its colonies. As white colonies developed, they sought self-governance. Canada became a self-governing confederation in 1867.
Australia and New Zealand followed as dominions in 1900, gaining political independence domestically.
Ireland hoped for home rule, but bills were defeated, fearing it would threaten the unity of the empire.
The ultimate threat came from Germany, with the outbreak of the First World War in 1914.
Victory in 1918 came at a hell price. It bankrupted Britain and signaled the beginning of the end for the empire.
In 1921, at its territorial peak, Ireland was granted independence.
The Second World War 1939 halted this briefly, as Britain again turned to the empire for support.
Bankrupt and exhausted, Britain could no longer support its overstretched and questioning colonies post-1945.
Gradually, from the 1940s to 70s, colonies were granted independence in what was called the Wind of Change.
Almost 400 years of colonial history ended. Most new nations joined the voluntary Commonwealth Association.
The final, most symbolic end came in 1997, when Britain formally handed over Hong Kong to China.
The legacy of the empire, however, remains with us to this day, as the English language,